Hi, Tony here again from all the remote things. I'm sounding a bit croaky today. I've got the wonderful Ken Rubin on with me today. How are you, Ken?
Tony, I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on the podcast.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. I've been looking forward to this wonderfully. Hey, look, before we get started, if you want to stay connected and learn more about our community, don't forget to join our Discord server. Check out our latest blog article on async. All the details below. We've got Ken. Ken, can you introduce yourself a little bit for those that don't know you?
Sure, I'd be happy to. My background is software engineering, and my degrees are all in computer science. And I've taken a sort of a typical path through organizations. I was a developer, then a project manager, then a VP of engineering. I've also been a VP of marketing, VP of sales. I've worked with a number of companies, 10 startup companies in my career, took two of them public in the US NASDAQ markets. Spent a couple years with IBM in the mid 1990s, working on large distributed object systems for banks, petroleum companies. And for any of the technical folks out there that are old enough to remember it, I come out of the Smalltalk world. So back in the late 1980s, I helped bring Smalltalk out of the research labs at Xerox PARC in the Silicon Valley here in the US. And at that point, we ended up starting a company called Park Place Systems. We were sort of early market object-oriented development tools and technology. So I've been actually doing Agile since the early 1990s and Scrum formally since 2000. At that time, I worked for a startup in Colorado called Genomica. We built software for statistical genetics, some sophisticated life sciences stuff. So really, I inherited like a 90-person team, wasn't functioning all that well. We decided to give Scrum a try and worked out better for us. So I've been using Scrum ever since, Kanban since 2010. So really full time. And some people might know that I was the first managing director of the Scrum Alliance.
Yeah.
So during 2007, I ran the worldwide Scrum organization. And really full time since then, I've been doing training and coaching with my company Evolution. So each week, I typically work with one or two companies somewhere around the world, either teaching a class or helping them introduce Agile into their environment. And hopefully they're being successful with it. A bit of a background on me.
It is a good background as well, and I knew many of those. Small talk, yeah, that was some that I'm old enough to remember small talk. So yeah, when you hear those things and you go, agile. To those who are listening who probably haven't realized, agile's not. We keep hearing this thing that's new. So I thought it would be interesting that when I have you on, is to given the time you've worked in agile and indeed Scrum, how's the world changed? So from when you started doing it, in 2000, because I remember when I started, we didn't really know what we were doing. We had Kent Beck's XP book because we were doing particularly XP at the time, and then Scrum sort of read up. Went, oh, this is fantastic stuff as well. So how has it changed, Ken?
So it's a good question. In 2000, it was very team focused. So it was agile in the small. It was really about how do we take a team and how do we help them embrace core agile principles and use it with a framework like Scrum. That was the intent. And what you've seen over time is that, roughly 2009, there became a larger focus on, well, how would you do Scrum more in the large? And by that, large meant multiple collaborating Scrum teams all working on a single initiative, maybe a single product, in doing that in some coordinated fashion. And that's where the genesis of a lot of the scaling frameworks of today came from. It was just people working on larger things and more than what a single Scrum team of maybe 5 to 9 people would be able to address. And so you had sort of that next evolution. What happened after that is a focus on more end-to-end agility. So what about something greater than just IT or development? Because Agile in the large, for most people, at least in the 2009, 2010 range, and honestly, for a lot of people today, it means multiple collaborating technical teams working to develop some product. Well, that's a bit myopic, right? What happens when you need to consider the grander parts of the organization that also have to collaborate in order to deliver true customer value? And so you start thinking about, okay, what about more business oriented people, and how is it that they align in. So you'd started to see, oh, I'd say 2015, thereabouts, more of a focus on embracing more than just dev and IT. And Scrum crossed the chasm, for those who are familiar with this, sort of the crossing the chasm metaphor of, getting past the early adopters across the chasm into the early majority. That's already happened in dev and IT. I mean, it's safe it's safe in not the scaled agile framework safe, but it is a secure thing today to do Scrum in a development environment. You could still argue that from a business point of view, using something like Scrum outside of dev and IT, maybe not quite across the chasm yet. I think it's getting there, but it's probably not, it's not yes necessarily safe to say, oh, we use Scrum in our marketing team, or we use Scrum in our sales team, or our legal team is using Scrum, or those folks are intertwined with the development team. So I think that's where things have evolved and continue to do so. And I think end-to-end business agility is, of course, where things will end up going. So that's kind of how I've seen it evolve.
And touching on that, and I'm not going to poke on any particular scaling framework, but you talked about agile and the large. And when you talk about agile and the large, you're obviously talking large as in terms of the enterprise itself, right? But we've seen the rise of the scaling mechanisms. What's your take on those? And I don't want to particularly poke at any because there's a number of them, right? So it's more thinking about scaling of and your thoughts of how you do scale that.
So I think that they tried and have attempted to solve a particular problem, which was the coordination of multiple development teams. I've already pointed out that I think that inherently that's a bit myopic, because in the large, the end-to-end solution includes more than just building. I mean, what if you were building an online betting system? All right, I've worked with several companies that do that. There's quite a bit of legal work that's involved in that. You might build some really cool features, but until the legal work has taken place, there's no way you could go live with this. So it's a bit myopic to say we built it, therefore we're done. That wouldn't be anywhere close to a fair statement. So if you're really looking to track how is work flowing across an organization, and your focus was on how did I coordinate or orchestrate the activities of multiple development teams, you could, in some contexts, arguably have missed the bigger piece completely. And so I think scaling frameworks have historically focused in that area. Not that it didn't need to be addressed, because there was an issue. I mean, Scrum was defined as one team, one backlog, one product owner, one Scrum master, right? Life is simple when that's your world, but for most of us, that's not our world. Our world is more complex. So I think that scaling frameworks have to be more inclusive, and it's more the end-to-end agility that really starts to matter. And a bunch of the frameworks have not done a particularly good job at addressing dependencies. And dependencies are what kills agility at scale, right? If I had to single out one thing based on my experience, it's the dependencies that are inherent in an organization that kills their ability to do agile at scale. And if you dance around that topic and don't address it head on, your hopes of being successful at scaling are diminished substantially. You'll get something done, you just won't get much. So I think the scaling frameworks have their place, but there's a lot more to do.
Yeah, and I agree with you. So there's two things I just want to dig a little deeper there. I heartily agree. Dependencies are the killer of work. I love that. And what's your take on the best or your methods of dealing with dependencies when you start to do that kind of thing? And I'm really interested in hearing your thoughts on that.
On dependencies, there's really two types of dependencies that we're interested in: structural dependencies and instantiated dependencies. Structural dependencies are those dependencies that are woven into the fabric of an organization. So, for example, if an organization has decided to put all of their UX designers onto one team, and that anytime any team needs a UX design, they have to go to that team to do it, they have a structural dependency on that team. And so if you think about it, I was like using the visual of a Post-it note, because we all know in Agile, you can't do Agile without Post-it notes. It's just so if this is right, if this is the feature that I want to build, and I have to go to the UX team to have them do the design work, essentially, I have to tear out that part of the user story, the feature, whatever we want to call it, and I have to go over to the other team and I have to give it to them. And that could happen a lot, right? I could be tearing this up into this is for the legal team to do their review and so on. And oh, and this is for the mainframe database team to do their work. And you start to see that in an organization where they've structured themselves this way, they have a lot of structural dependencies. And the problem is at scale, you can't manage this problem. And the only way to solve it is you'll have to do some form of restructuring. So structural dependencies are the killer ones. Instantiated dependencies are an example. It's like it's my object technology coming back to haunt me, right? The structural dependencies are the classes. Instantiated dependencies are specific instances. Oh, this is the story where I have to. This is our registration screen, right? Where we're registering someone new onto our system. Well, now I have to tear out the piece for the UX team to design the registration screen. That's a specific instance. Most of the approaches to dealing with dependencies deal with they assume they already exist and they're focused on how to manage them. That's the wrong solution.
Yeah.
If I can eliminate the structural dependency, I eliminate all future instances of it. So if you really want to win at this level, and there's like 7 different techniques for dealing with structural dependencies, you have to bring them all together, address the problem at that level. You won't get rid of all your dependencies.
No.
But you'll minimize them. And since the dependency problem grows exponentially, not linearly, you want to make sure that you minimize as much as you can.
And I think that's the key word too. I think is that I often hear people say we're going to eliminate the dependencies, and I've never seen that happen. So I'm happy that you call that out as well. You minimize them, and then you manage those ones that you just definitely can't deal with, right? So you just have to look at other solutions. The other one I just want to dig a little bit deeper on is the language of Agile, let alone the Agile and Scrum. I was having a conversation with a leader just yesterday. Well, I thought it was quite poignant to sort of bring that to the table today. And he was saying, the biggest thing I have a problem with in Agile is the words. You guys use all these words. How do we deal with that? He said, because my leaders don't understand. And I was really interested when I was thinking about that and talking to you about that today, Ken, is asking your thoughts on that, because you've obviously had that conversation, I would imagine, many times.
So I appreciate their perspective. I mean, to me, vocabulary is critical. I mean, I joke and say that I'm a vocabulary nut. I mean, the Essential Scrum book has a 22-page glossary. And when I submitted it, the editor was like, really? You need 22 pages to define. I'm like, yeah, I defined every single word that wasn't in common use, because I believe I know, Tony, you've seen what I've seen. 2 people working on the same project, having a conversation using the identical word, and they talk right past each other. And to me, it's unfortunate, because a lot of times they actually think they're in agreement and they're clearly not. And it's the vocabulary that's getting in the way. So I appreciate their concern about, why do we have these new terms? Why Scrum Master? Why is that term even necessary? And as I understand it, the term was chosen simply because no one could possibly carry any baggage with that term. You couldn't have possibly heard the term before. So, I mean, if I said to you project manager, we know the old joke, right? You say 10 people use the word project manager, they have 12 different definitions of it, right? So if you use a term like Scrum Master, like, I don't know what that is. Great. So it is whatever I tell you it is, kind of idea, which is why some of those terms are there. We could probably benefit from some simplification vocabulary. I believe in parsimony, right? As few terms as possible to communicate what needs to be communicated. And every term has one definition, or at least as close to that as you can. And if you do that, then I find that the vocabulary tends to map, and then you obviously use the vocabulary of the domain whenever you possibly can.
And listeners, it's a good cue there and a good segue into Essential Scrum, which is the book that Ken wrote. And it's one of the most famous and I think best-selling Scrum books, and there's a reason for that. Is it's very quite simple in the way it leads you through Scrum, but it's the lexicon that you just talked about of the terms that is so fantastic, and I've used it many times myself, and that's why I sort of wanted to ask that question of you today. So if you get a chance to read that book, I think it would benefit you if you haven't, you're watching this. Um, I'm not going to go digging into that because a lot of people ask you about Essential Scrum, and they've asked you about that over the years, and it's a great book. I was doing my research, and I was going to ask you, well, Ken, why haven't you written another book? And I discovered that you had. So I had to go and buy it so I had to read it. And it was it's I don't think a lot of people know this particular book's out there. So I just wanted to have a chat about it and where it came from. It's called Succeeding with Objects. You did write it with Adele Goldberg, but talk to me a little bit about that book and how it came about, why people don't know it's there, because it's a really good book.
I appreciate that. So succeeding with objects came about. So in the late 1980s, I was working with Park Place Systems, as I mentioned in the introduction, and we were trying to change the world. We were trying to get the world to adopt object-oriented development, object-oriented technologies, and Smalltalk was the vehicle through which we were attempting to do that. And we had a lot of customers because we were the market leader in object-oriented technology in the day. And we decided that after working with, and I was running the training and consulting group at Park Place. I was manager of methodology development, a nice title, and sort of the director of professional services. And we said, we ought to write a book based on our experiences so we can help others benefit. So Adele Goldberg, who was the person who brought Smalltalk out of the research labs at Xerox PARC. If people have heard her name, it's because she's the one that gave Steve Jobs the demo of basically the Dorado machine at Xerox PARC, on which the Lisa and then eventually the Mac was based. So she was the one that ended up giving him that demo. And so a lot of the ideas of Smalltalk are what the foundation of the Mac was really all about. And we said, okay, so she's this really famous person. And she was also president of the ACM, the Association for Computing Machinery. And we decided, well, let's write this book. And we went out and we interviewed a lot of our customers at the time. And we tried to base it on real examples of what people were doing to build large scale systems using Smalltalk. And we tried to bring that all to bear. And it got published in 1994. So, it's old by today's standards. And it was pre-Amazon. So in its day, though, I jokingly say it was as popular as Essential Scrum back in the object-oriented technology days. But today, and this is my hope for Agile. Our joke about object technology in 1988 was people would say something like this: "We're going to an object-oriented design meeting," and we said we'll know that object-oriented technology has arrived when in the future people just say, "I'm going to a design meeting," and the object-oriented part is implied, because how else would you possibly do it? So if you'd say to me, when is Agile truly arrived? I would say when you don't even need to use the term anymore, because the assumption is that the foundational principles that underlie an Agile approach to doing things are just, well, that's just the way we do it. So, I mean, why would I have to even use the word? Because is there another approach you're advocating? So if so, please advocate it. And so that was our goal, was to help sort of advance things along. And it was a popular book in its day, but by today's standards, we've moved beyond some of the concepts in that book, but a lot of it is still relevant if you're doing object-oriented development.
I was going to say, even if you're doing development in general, because I read it, and one of the things that struck me was talking about how you make the decisions and thinking about how you actually look to where you're going, and the methods that you talked about in there. You could use that in any. So I would just say to anyone, it's worth a read.
I appreciate that.
And I'll do a little promo on it. You can find it on Thrift Books, which is where I found it online. So absolutely worth it for some of the nuggets, and even if it's just looking at some of the historical stuff. But I think there's a lot of concepts in there that we could still take on today. it's interesting what you just said there, because that sort of leads into your hope for agile. And everybody sort of asked that question of all the people who've been doing agile for where do you see it going? And I just want to flip that a little bit and say, where do you want to see it go? Where do you want to see it evolve to? And what do we need to do to get it there? Which is the interesting thing for me, because it's always easy to say, oh, I'd love to see it go there, but I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on what we need to do to take it to the next level.
So for me, I think about the agile mindset. That to me is the critical piece. Scrum is the mechanics behind one approach to performing agile. I happen to like Scrum quite a bit and use it very frequently, but I also use Kanban. There are times that's just a sensible approach for me to use. So I'm all about whatever's best for the situation. It's the mindset, though, that underlies both of those that's really important to me. So I'll give you an example of today where I hope things are going and why it would make certainly my life easier. I'm building a new house. And so I engage with the architecture firm. And during a kickoff meeting, I said, look, we're about to engage on a rather large project here. I'm going to spend a fair amount of money on this project. I'd like to explain to you the principles by which I operate. And I'm talking to them things like fast feedback, like don't make an assumption about something you think I might want, invest a lot of time and my money in coming up with a lot of different designs just to show me it's like if you just had asked questions earlier and we learned into this quicker, we could have eliminated those paths as not the right paths and then spent our time and money in more fruitful areas. So I had to essentially train the people I was working with on this project on the mindset. The benefit would have been if, like, of course, we're all aligned on this already. This is the natural way we do it. Everybody has well, we do this, and then we do A, and then we do B, and then we do C. This is a very linear, sequential, dare I say, waterfall style approach. I'm like, really? Does it have to be that way?
Mm.
I get it. Certain things have to happen before certain other things, but these core principles, they pervade all of that. So that's where I want to see Agile going, is to where the mindset is a common shared set of principles so that when you engage with people, it's just efficient, right? It's in our ability to work well together to get good flow, to get to end a job in a cost-effective way. That's my hope. In terms of which frameworks are there at the end, whichever ones make the most sense, right, to get the job done. And all frameworks will evolve over time. New ones will pop up, and that's fine. They should. So I'm not a predictor as to which frame. If people are worried about is Scrum going to kill Kanban or is Kanban going to kill Scrum, it's like, well, that's completely the wrong question to ask.
Yeah, I'm not a fan of the framework wars, because I absolutely agree with you. You have to use what's right. And I love that you said that they're going to evolve, because other frameworks could evolve out of those frameworks as those frameworks themselves evolve from things, right? So that's a really good piece. And that leads me to the next question is really, there's been a change, which everybody had enforced upon them in the last 3-4 years, which is the whole move to remote work. It is a remote podcast. And when we look at that move to remote work and even hybrid, it's interesting to see how that's changed the way we work in Agile. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts and what you're seeing and change in techniques that you're applying within that as well.
So we all know that the pandemic has changed things permanently, and for
Including
better,
including my voice at the moment, Ken.
I mean, I certainly it's keeping people like me off the road, where most of the time I was traveling, and yeah, I still do travel, but it's mainly remote these days, which I very much enjoy. Uh, in terms of Agile, so clearly remote collaboration existed before the pandemic. And but a lot of organizations, it was more of a, well, we're going to set up a remote team in another country and we're doing that for cost reasons. And so they by which to me, I could never justify why organizations did that particular thing. So I think if they truly analyzed the economics of those choices, they would have realized that they probably weren't getting the return on investment they expected. And they introduced unnecessary issues. the pandemic, the big change for me about that was it said remote is now the norm, and that you can't think about it as it's a cost savings approach to have people distributed out. I'll hire where it's cheapest to do it. Seemed to be a prevalent attitude, at least among business people. Then it became, I have no options here. I mean, people aren't going to be coming together. So how do we actually make this work? So when I'm in classes today and the concept of remote comes up, it's no longer people asking me the question, can Scrum or Kanban be done in a remote fashion? The answer to that, I mean, that's we're done with that question.
Yeah.
I mean, of course you can, right? I mean, now having the right tools in place, of course, clearly do matter, right? I mean, if you're going to be remote, then you're not going to rely on the whiteboard behind you to be the surface through which everybody is going to, your visual radiator of information. So we need the tools. Where the one thing that we still haven't solved and we can't solve is time zones. Right? To me, remote problems are good tools significantly help with remote work. That's a given. The fact that I'm 12 and a half hours distributed from one of my colleagues and we don't work synchronously introduces particular problems, right? Tools help, right? Because, all right, since we're not synchronous, I need to capture my thoughts in a way that when the other person is now working, they can pick up. Yeah, but I do lose the synchronous interaction, the exchanges that could happen. So remote work with people in reasonable time zones of one another, brilliant, right? And I think that's going to be extremely effective. But I always get the question in the class. So I got colleagues, I'm in California. I'm not personally, but my team's in California and I got other people in Mumbai. Okay, well, you're 12 and a half hours different. You can't get much worse than that. Well, how do we deal with that? As best you can, right? I mean, either one, don't do that, or two, you're going. I mean, the typical solution is share the pain,
Yeah.
right? Meaning, don't inconvenience one side always, right? So if you're going to do the daily scrum and you're going to do it in the morning California time, do that for a couple sprints and then reverse it. Do it at a time that is convenient in Mumbai and not so convenient in California. Share the pain, unless one side was hired under the expectation that they would be working altered hours, in which case that's part of the natural job. Then essentially we've eliminated time zone issues to some extent. But to me, remote is no longer one of those, well, it's a cost saving thing, so we're doing it. It's more of that's the world today. And yeah, we may be back in the office somewhat. It'll never be the way it was, though.
No, and I agree with you, and I'm glad to hear you bring that up. I think the sync async thing is very poignant. You heard me say at the beginning of the cast that there's a particular blog that I've written on async and sync, and the thing for me is one of the tools. It when you've got two people and you transfer information between each other, you can't get any better than that face to face, like you and I are doing today, right? That's the best of it. But when you can't, then there are methods that you can use to sync and async and being very specific about how you do it, when you do it. And as you said, setting the teams up for success and thinking about how you actually interact in the synchronous. But I think you can go a long way to actually, what I see is people either go so far to the right, they cripple themselves because they go completely async, or they go all the way to this way, what you just said, and create pain because everything's got to be done synchronous and will cause pain for one other side. And so it's actually being very deliberate about your sync and your async. Your thoughts on that?
Being thoughtful on how we're going to solve that problem is critical to me. There's not. I think when I get asked that question in a classroom, people might believe there's a cookie cutter solution to that, which clearly there is not. I mean, they're going to look at where their skill sets are, how they chose to structure their teams, right, and their ability to have the proper tool support in place to guide the level of synchronicity that they want to have in their conversations. I mean, we don't always have to have a synchronous discussion, right, to be successful. I mean, yes, it's high bandwidth, right? You and I, we're not exchanging emails to do this, right? We're doing a synchronous real-time discussion. Great. But not everything has to be that way. So I want them to be thoughtful about it. I think, there's not going to be that cookie cutter for them. I would prefer them to, my personal opinion is before you make a tool selection, understand where your issues are and where you believe tools will add leverage to giving you a good solution, because then you'll know why you're using that tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I meant by be thoughtful about your choices here, because I do think there are solutions that are better than others. I don't even know what best means, right? But clearly there are those things that are better than others. So let's get those.
Yeah, I think it's the context. What's the design purposefully and, as you said, thoughtfully, or the context of your organization or your teams and what you're doing. One tip I like to use is don't be afraid to record something. So I was talking about the tacit transfer of information between two individuals, you and I.
Mhm.
Well, if you record it, actually, people watching and listening to that then are actually going, oh, it's like talking to the person. So you can get those nuances across. Doesn't fix everything, of course, but it's a lot easier than the written word, because written word can be misconstrued sometimes as well. So don't be afraid to use that, I say to people.
I agree. I mean, if you think about like a daily scrum, if we have people distributed all over the world, someone's not going to be on the call because it's 2 a.m, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to be on the call at 2 a.m, and I wouldn't expect anybody else to be. You could say, well, maybe just have everybody write down what they want to communicate. If their approach is to answer those 3 questions, then maybe they write them down. Yeah, my experience is people don't read them. Just, but if people did a 90-second video, people are much more likely to say, oh, Ken posted his 90-second video where he's going to give us an update. They're much more likely to click on the video link and watch that than they are to read whatever I might have written. I'm not saying that some people won't read, but a lot of times when I get asked, well, why don't we just do this in writing? I'm like, will your people actually read it? Be truthful now. And they're like, maybe not. Then it wasn't worth it. We're just wasting our time at that point.
It's interesting, and have some fun with it. Have some fun with it, guys. If you use the video, we work asynchronous, synchronous because we're async and synchronous because we're a remote organization. And our CIO John, he does things like turn his video upside down and sideways and things like that just to catch our attention. So yeah, have a bit of fun with it as well. Look, Kim, we're really at the end of our time. It's been fantastic having you on, and I thank you greatly for taking the time to talk to us today. How can people get in touch with Ken Rubin? How can they get involved with the things that you do?
No, I appreciate you asking. If you're interested in what my organization does, Involution, our website would be a good source. So it's just www.involution, so INNOLUTION.com, or you can send me email, krubin@involution.com, and I'm also on Twitter, LinkedIn, all the standard things you'd expect someone to be on. But and I'm always happy to answer questions. So if people want to reach out, when I teach classes, for example, I tell people at the end of class, look, class may be over, but your thinking about this isn't going to be over just because class is over. So feel free, to reach out with questions. I try to respond in a timely fashion to input.
And that's fantastic. We'll put all the details in the show notes so that you can get a hold of Ken. Look, it's been fantastic to have you on all the remote things for viewers. Don't forget, come and join our community, remoteaf.co. Click the community button, join us on Discord. We've got a like-minded group of people talking and thinking agility, remote, hybrid, and we'd love to have you on there. Ken Rubin, it's been fantastic to have you on all the remote things today.
Tony, thank you. I really enjoyed it.